Three of the greatest last stands in human history. These are immortal monuments to heroism, built upon bones and painted with the blood of great warriors. They are an endless source of inspiration for courage, sacrifice, and unyielding spirit. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about none other than some of the greatest last stands in human history. If the Ottomans had won this battle, who knows what calamities would have befallen the Christian world. These were the exact words Queen Elizabeth I of England used to describe the first last stand we want to highlight today, an event that would decide the fate of all Europe, the Great Siege of Malta in 1565. After capturing Constantinople and burying the Byzantine Empire in 1453, the Ottoman Empire of the Turks officially entered the ranks of the world's superpowers and truly became a menace threatening the security of Christendom on the old continent. However, the Turks' ambitions in the West could not be realized until they solved the problem of Malta. Located strategically in the Mediterranean Sea, guarding the waters between the Italian peninsula and North Africa, the islands of Malta were a perfect stepping stone, one the Ottoman forces needed to conquer if Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent wished to subjugate Western Europe. But for the Turks, capturing Malta was never an easy task, as it was the headquarters of the Knights Hospitaller, or the Order of the Knights of St. John, one of the most formidable warrior orders of Christendom. Thus, Suleiman decided to launch an expedition to conquer Malta and erase the Crusader Knights once and for all. On March 22, 1565, the Ottoman fleet set sail from Istanbul. It was one of the largest naval forces ever assembled since antiquity, with nearly 200 warships carrying 40,000 soldiers, including 6,000 elite janissaries, 9,000 cavalrymen, and vast amounts of artillery. The Sultan entrusted command of this massive army to Grand Vizier Mustafa Pasha, Admiral Piale, and several other generals. On the other side, the defending forces of Malta were led by Jean Parisot de Valette, the 49th Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, commanding a meager force of around 8,700 men with only about 700 knights among them, the rest being mercenaries and local militia. Thanks to early intelligence of the Ottoman attack, Grand Master de Valette had fortified Malta's defenses, focusing on three key fortresses: St. Michael, St. Angelo, and St. Elmo. He also sent out desperate pleas for reinforcements to Europe, but little aid came in return. Isolated and outnumbered, the defenders of Malta found themselves in dire straits, as many would say only God could save them now. At dawn on Friday, May 18th, the Ottoman fleet appeared off the coast of Malta. After assessing the situation and consulting with his officers, Grand Vizier Mustafa Pasha agreed to first target the fortifications. Soon after, cannons were erected, and all Ottoman guns and swords pointed towards Fort St. Elmo. For 36 days and nights, starting on May 27th, relentless artillery fire from 30 cannons rained down on St. Elmo, along with wave after wave of Ottoman assaults, leaving the fortress in ruins. Despite the devastation, the defenders continued to fight valiantly under Grand Master de Valette's orders. By June 16th, the Ottomans launched a full-scale assault on the severely damaged walls. At that moment, the Maltese warriors committed their souls to God and charged headlong into battle. Their spirits soared to such heights that even the sailors and militia were said to be as brave as the knights themselves. However, with the overwhelming odds, after 9 days of fierce fighting, almost all of the 1,500 defenders at St. Elmo were killed, save for 9 knights captured alive and a few who escaped. Yet, before joining Christ in heaven, they managed to take 8,000 Ottoman soldiers with them. Among the dead were half of the elite Janissary force, and worse still, Dragut, the famed Sword of Islam, was slain, a blow that shattered Ottoman morale. After capturing St. Elmo, Mustafa Pasha turned his gaze to the Senglea Peninsula. On July 15th, he ordered a two-pronged attack from both land and sea, aiming to crush Fort St. Michael, which guarded the area. However, the Ottomans were unknowingly walking into a trap set by de Valette. A flotilla carrying 1,000 Janissaries attacked the northern tip of Senglea, only to sail into the range of 5 cannons stationed at Fort St. Angelo on the Birgu Peninsula. The result was 800 Ottoman elite troops turned into fish bait. On land, the Turkish assault was repelled. and St. Michael stood strong. What seemed like a perfect plan ended in disastrous failure, enraging Mustafa Pasha. He ordered 65 cannons to surround Sanglea and Birgu, initiating one of the longest artillery bombardments in history, with over 100,000 cannonballs fired. By August 7th, the Ottomans launched another simultaneous assault on both fortresses. This time, they breached the walls with explosives and appeared to be on the verge of victory, but were met with fierce resistance from the defenders. With their backs against the wall, Grand Master de Valette, then already 70 years old, personally wielded his sword and led the charge on the front lines. His bravery and leadership were a shining example and a tremendous boost to the morale of the knights and Maltese citizens in their desperate fight. In a moment of crisis, Knight Vincenzo Anastasi led his cavalry from Medina in a surprise attack on an unguarded Ottoman field hospital, slaughtering over 60 men. The sudden rear assault convinced the Ottomans that a Christian relief army from Sicily had arrived, prompting them to retreat in fear. The August 7th defeat dealt a crushing blow to Ottoman morale. Despair and waning fighting spirit began to infect their ranks like a venomous snake waiting to strike a lethal blow against Sultan Suleiman's soldiers. Throughout August and into early September, the Ottomans continued their assaults on St. Michael and St. Angelo while pillaging nearby towns, but to no avail. Disease, combat losses, and dwindling supplies decimated the Ottoman army, sending 1/3 of their forces back to Allah. Meanwhile, the remarkable heroism and tenacity of the Maltese defenders spread across Europe. Finally, on September 7th, 1565, Grand Master de Valette's cries for reinforcements were answered. An army of 8,000 Christian soldiers from various European kingdoms arrived. Witnessing the devastation caused by the Ottomans, burned villages, fields in ashes, and innocent civilians slaughtered, the Christian knights were outraged and stormed into battle. They tore through Ottoman lines, drenching their swords in blood, and drove the invaders off the island. Sultan Suleiman's forces were defeated. Of the 40,000 soldiers sent to Malta, only about an eighth returned alive. The Great Siege of 1565 is considered one of the most humiliating defeats for the Ottoman Empire. On the other hand, it stands as one of the most glorious victories in the history of the Knights Hospitaller. These legendary warriors will forever be remembered as the heroes who vanquished the Dragon Ottoman, saving Europe and defending the Christian faith. Without them, the people of Europe today might very well be bowing to Allah instead of Jesus, reading the Quran instead of the Bible, and speaking Turkish rather than their mother tongues. Nearly 4 centuries after that fateful battle in Malta, another pivotal clash occurred far to the east, in Russia. This battle was equally decisive in shaping the course of World War II and changing the fate of Europe, if not the entire world. The battle we are referring to is none other than the legendary Stalingrad. In the summer of 1942, after failing to crush the heart of the Soviet Union, Moscow, the Nazi army realized that their blitzkrieg strategy had failed. If they were to subdue the Soviet bear, they had to find another way. And so, Adolf Hitler and his inner circle turned their attention to southern Russia, aiming to destroy Soviet production capacity, control the vital Volga River transport routes, and create a springboard for a future assault on Moscow from the rear. The primary objective of this campaign was the city of Stalingrad. Moreover, as the city bore the name of Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, the battle would carry immense symbolic and political significance for both sides. On June 28, 1942, the German army launched an offensive in southern Russia with 2 army groups tasked with different objectives. Army Group A would target the oil fields in the Caucasus, while Army Group B was ordered to advance towards the Volga and capture Stalingrad. After 2 months, the Germans had crossed the Don River and were at the gates of Stalingrad with 270,000 soldiers, 500 tanks, 600 aircraft, and 3,000 artillery pieces. On the Soviet side, the Red Army was clearly outmatched. They had less than 200,000 troops, 100 fewer tanks than the Germans, 800 fewer artillery guns, and only half as many aircraft. The Battle of Stalingrad began with a devastating aerial bombardment by the German Luftwaffe under the command of General Wolfram von Richthofen. Incidentally, he was a cousin of the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen, a legendary World War I ace pilot who downed 80 enemy planes. Under Wolfram von Richthofen's command, the Luftwaffe swiftly annihilated 2/3 of the Soviet Air Force and gained complete air superiority over Stalingrad. Despite being overwhelmed in the air and on the ground, the Red Army fought on fiercely. However, this did not prevent the Germans from seizing control of the northern and southern parts of the city. In early September, the Soviet 24th and 66th Armies launched a major offensive against the German 14th Panzer Corps, but the Luftwaffe intervened, destroying 30 Soviet tanks and forcing the Red Army to retreat. This scenario repeated 2 weeks later, with 49 Soviet tanks left in ruins. At this point, the Red Army was forced into a defensive posture, and they fought tooth and nail for every house and street corner in their homeland city. Not one step back. This was the command from the Supreme Leader Stalin, which became the rallying cry for the soldiers and citizens of Stalingrad, inspiring them to hold their ground and defend every inch of Soviet soil. To reinforce the Stalingrad front, the Soviets mobilized every available unit and sent them to the west bank of the Volga River. This allowed the Red Army to mount a brave and resolute defense. Additionally, to counter the overwhelming firepower of the German artillery, Soviet soldiers decided to engage in close-quarters combat, hugging the enemy in a bloody fight that escalated the chaos and brutality. By the end of October 1942, the Germans had captured 90% of Stalingrad. However, the harsh winter and the Soviet defenders' fierce resistance temporarily halted the Nazi advance. By this point, the fatal flaw in the German strategy had become glaringly obvious. By dividing their forces into two separate army groups targeting distant objectives, the Germans violated one of the fundamental principles of warfare, concentrating their forces. As a result, their army was stretched thin across the battlefield. When frontline commanders recognized this problem and suggested withdrawing across the Don River to consolidate their position, Hitler refused. The symbolic importance of Stalingrad was too great. Any retreat would be a humiliating blow to the Nazi propaganda machine. Sensing this weakness, by late autumn, Soviet generals Zhukov and Vasilevsky mustered a massive force of 800,000 soldiers in preparation for a large-scale counteroffensive. On November 19, 1942, Operation Uranus began. With the element of surprise on their side, 3 Soviet armies under General Vatutin's command launched a two-pronged attack, breaking through the Germans' thin defensive lines. Within 4 days, the Red Army successfully encircled the German 6th Army, trapping 265,000 troops inside the city. In a desperate bid to rescue the encircled soldiers on December 12th, Field Marshal Manstein led 22 divisions of Army Group Don in a relief operation known as Operation Winter Storm. However, defeats both in the air and on the ground doomed the rescue effort to failure. With the collapse of the external relief forces, the fate of the 30,000 German troops trapped in Stalingrad was sealed. After 3 months of Soviet encirclement, the Germans were utterly crushed. This marked the climactic moment in the Stalingrad saga. The battle is considered the turning point in the Soviet Union's Great Patriotic War, as it shifted the balance of power, enabling the Allies to go on the offensive on all fronts. Alongside the legendary victories at Malta and Stalingrad, many last stands throughout history have ended in defeat for the defenders. Nonetheless, these brave warriors are forever remembered as symbols of resilience and courage. The Imperial Japanese Army during the Battle of Luzon in 1945 is a prime example. In World War II's Pacific Theater, the Philippine Islands were considered a crucial strategic point. The presence of 135,000 Japanese soldiers and 227 aircraft posed a direct threat to Allied forces, particularly the United States military. As a result, capturing the Philippines became a top priority for the Allies. On January 9, 1945, the Allies launched their assault on Luzon, the largest and most important island in the Philippines. At 7 a.m., 70 battleships and cruisers began a ferocious bombardment to clear the way for an amphibious landing at Lingayen Gulf, which followed an hour later. However, the invasion was not easy, as Japanese kamikaze planes fiercely resisted. The escort carrier Omani Bay, along with several other warships, was sunk. In response, aircraft from the U.S. Third Fleet launched attacks on Japanese positions. Thanks to this, after several days, 175,000 troops of the U.S. Sixth Army successfully landed along a 32-kilometer stretch of the Lingayen coast. From there, the American forces encountered little resistance and swiftly advanced toward Manila. A second landing took place on January 15th, about 72 kilometers southwest of Manila. 2 weeks later, U.S. forces closed in on the Japanese defensive positions south of the city. Here, the Imperial Japanese Army displayed true samurai spirit, fiercely resisting and halting the American advance. They employed a scorched earth strategy, destroying every bridge and key infrastructure as U.S. forces entered Manila. They also established countless defensive strongholds throughout the city. Despite these efforts, the outer Japanese defensive line was breached on February 11th, and the remaining forces were surrounded. Nevertheless, the warriors of the Emperor did not let the Americans claim victory easily. The Allies had to fight for several weeks, losing over 1,000 men in the process of clearing out the Japanese troops in Manila. Even after the Allies had taken control of all the strategic and economic positions on Luzon by early March, small groups of Japanese soldiers retreated into the northern and southeastern mountains to wage guerrilla warfare. Some of these soldiers held out in the mountains until Japan's unconditional surrender, and a few even continued fighting for years after. The last stands we've discussed here are just 3 of many battles in history where defenders fought bravely against overwhelming odds and earned eternal glory. So, which battle left the biggest impression on you? Malta in 1565, Stalingrad, or Luzon in 1945? And are there any other battles that deserve a place on today's list? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For now, goodbye and see you next time.